You have believed your mind for so long that you forgot it was only speaking. Every fear, every image, every memory, every prediction arrived with the authority of truth, and you obeyed it as if the voice in your head were reality itself. But the mind is not the throne. It is not the cause. It is not the final authority. Much of what you call your mind is only old conditioning echoing through your attention, asking to be worshipped again. Today, we separate you from the noise, not so you can fight your mind, but so you can remember what stands before it, behind it, and above it. You are not your mind. You are the cause. Here is what most people do when the mental noise becomes unbearable. They think harder. They argue with the fear. They try to out-reason the anxiety. They generate new thoughts to replace the old thoughts, as though the mind can be defeated by more of itself. This is the false strategy, and it is exhausting because every thought you use to fight a thought is still a thought. You are still inside the system you are trying to escape. Watch what happens inside you as you hear this. When you resist a thought, when you push against it, when you tell yourself to stop thinking it, the thought gains gravity. Resistance is attention. Attention is energy. And energy feeds whatever receives it. The very act of mental warfare confirms that you are identified with the battle. You are not watching the war from a distance. You are inside it, convinced that winning the next round will finally bring peace. This is where most people lose their power. They mistake the battlefield for the territory. They believe that if they can just silence the loudest thought, something will shift. But nothing shifts because the strategy itself is built on a false premise. It assumes that the mind is the problem and that more mind is the solution. Neither is true. The problem is not the thought. The problem is the throne you have surrendered to it. Before we go any further, I want to ask something of you that has nothing to do with taking notes. I want you to do something far more useful. For the entire length of this video, I want you to watch your mind, not engage it, not correct it, not agree or disagree with what it says. Simply watch it. Become the one who notices thoughts arriving, shifting, and dissolving. Let the commentary run. Let the opinions surface. Let the fears show themselves. And instead of entering them, simply notice that you are the one noticing. This is not a passive instruction. It is the most active thing a human being can do. Most of us have spent our entire lives being dragged through whatever the mind produces. We have never once stood still and simply watched the current pass. Right now, that is your only task. Let this teaching pour into you while you hold your attention slightly behind the mind, observing it as you would observe weather passing through a window. If you feel resistance to this idea, good. Notice the resistance. If you feel confusion, notice the confusion. If a part of you wants to argue that this is impossible, notice the part that wants to argue. You do not have to dissolve your thoughts in order to begin this practice. You only have to stop pretending that you are them. That small shift in position is the beginning of everything this video is about. The commitment I am asking you to make is not a promise you write down. It is a posture you assume right now. A posture of inner watching. A posture of quiet authority over your own attention. You are not your mind. And the evidence for that will begin arriving the moment you hold that position long enough to feel it. Stay with this. Everything that follows will build on what you are doing right now. Think about the last time you fell into a loop. You know what I mean. The thought arrives. Maybe it is about a person, a mistake, a fear, a future scenario that has not happened and may never happen. And instead of passing through you the way wind passes through an open field, it catches on something inside you. It hooks, and suddenly you are inside it, running the same circuit again, arriving at the same emotional conclusion, feeling the same weight in your chest that you have felt 100 times before. This is rumination, and for many people, it is the background frequency of their entire inner life. The exhausting part is not just the thought itself. It is the belief that you must resolve it before you can have peace. So you analyze, you rehearse conversations that never happened. You build cases for and against yourself. You try to determine whether the fear is rational. You examine evidence. You weigh possibilities. And while you are doing all of this, another part of you is watching the energy drain out, and still the loop has not closed. Because loops built inside the mind cannot be closed by the mind. They are maintained by the act of entering them. There is also the fear underneath the loop, not just the surface thought, but the deeper alarm signal that the thought seems to confirm. The thought says you are not safe. The thought says you are not enough. The thought says that something terrible is coming, or that something irreplaceable is already gone. And you believe it. Not because you decided to believe it, but because the thought arrived with such emotional intensity that belief felt automatic. This is the tyranny of the unexamined inner life. Not evil, not weakness, just untrained attention responding to inherited programming. And then there is the intrusive quality of certain thoughts, the ones that arrive without invitation, the ones that surface in quiet moments, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon when nothing external seems to have triggered them. They arrive with opinions about you. They arrive with predictions. They arrive with memories that have been emotionally amplified beyond what the original event contained. They feel urgent. They feel like warnings. And because they feel like warnings, you treat them like truth. This is the pattern. Not one thought, not one moment, but a deep groove worn into the inner landscape by years of identification. A groove that says, when a thought arrives, enter it. When a feeling surges, become it. When fear speaks, listen as though your life depends on the answer. And the more you follow this groove, the deeper it becomes, until it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like you. But it is not you. It is the groove, and you are about to learn the difference. Here is a reframing that changes everything if you let it land properly. The mental suffering you experience is not evidence that reality is broken. It is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence of where your identity is currently located. The pain of the loop is the pain of being fused with the thought stream, of having placed your sense of self inside the current of mental movement, and then been carried along by it without any awareness that another position was possible. There is a difference between having thoughts and being the thinker. Read that again slowly. Having thoughts is what happens when content arises in awareness. Being the thinker is what happens when you fuse with that content and believe it is you. Most people never make this distinction. Most people live their entire lives convinced that the voice in their head is the truest version of themselves. That if the voice says you are unworthy, then unworthiness is what you are. That if the voice says danger is coming, then danger is already here. The thought and the self feel like the same thing because no one ever taught you to separate them. When you are fused with thought, pain has no exit, because the very instrument you would use to examine the pain is already inside the pain. You are trying to see the eye with the eye. You are using thought to investigate thought, and every conclusion you reach is another thought. This is why insight without disidentification produces nothing lasting. You can understand your patterns perfectly in theory and still be completely trapped in them in practice, because understanding is also a mental movement, and mental movements do not free you from identification with mental movements. But here is what the pain is actually telling you. It is telling you that you are close to the edge of the thought stream, and that something in you already knows it is not home. Pain, in this context, is a signal of misalignment, not a verdict on your nature. When you feel the constriction of a fear loop, that constriction is the sensation of consciousness squeezed into a shape that is smaller than what it actually is. It is not punishment, it is pressure, and pressure always points towards something that needs to open. The suffering you feel when a thought loop will not release is the suffering of the observer, imprisoned inside what it is observing. You are the screen being confused for the image. You are the space being confused for the object moving through it. The image is real. The object is real. But you are not either of those things. You are the awareness within which they appear. And until you know that experientially, not just intellectually, the images and objects will continue to feel like your identity. This means that every moment of mental anguish contains within it a piece of evidence about something deeper. It is pointing, even in its most disorienting form, toward the existence of a self that can suffer, which means a self that can also stand apart from the suffering. You would not feel trapped if there were not something in you that remembers what it feels like to be free. That remembering is not just a wish, it is a signal from the part of you that was never caught. So, who is the one watching the loop? This is not a rhetorical question designed to sound mystical. It is an entirely practical question that demands a real answer. When you observe yourself in rumination, when you notice that the fear has arrived again, when you catch the thought mid-circuit and feel a flicker of awareness that says, "Here we go again," who is doing that noticing? That noticing is not the thought. Thoughts do not notice themselves. A fear does not step back from itself and say, "I see what you are doing." Something else does. And that something else is the subject of this entire video. There is a layer of you that is not made of thought, not made of memory, not made of prediction, not made of opinion or preference, or acquired conditioning. It has been called by many names across many traditions, but its function is always the same. It watches, it registers, it is always present, even when the mind is loudest. It is the silence inside the noise, not because it is absent, but because it does not move the way noise moves. You have touched it in moments of sudden stillness, in the pause between one thought ending and the next beginning, in the instant before sleep when the mind goes quiet for just a fraction of a second. Most people mistake that stillness for emptiness. They rush past it back into the noise because the noise feels familiar and familiarity feels like identity. But what if that stillness is not absence? What if it is the most accurate version of you that exists? What if the one who watches the thought is not a lesser state than the thinker, but a greater one? What if authority over your inner world does not begin with controlling your thoughts, but with returning to the awareness that was never controlled by them? This is where the teaching begins to open in a direction that most people have never been pointed. Not toward better thinking, not toward more disciplined affirmations, not toward a different set of mental stories, but toward the identity underneath thought, the awareness that precedes every mental movement, the cause that generates what the mind then expresses. Because here's what the mind actually is. It is an instrument, a powerful one, a sophisticated one, but an instrument nonetheless. and instruments are only as useful as the hand that holds them. What you are about to encounter in this video is the answer to the question that loops and rumination and fear have been asking you to answer. Not who is afraid, but who is the one who knows that fear is there. Not what the mind is saying, but what is beneath the mind that is capable of choosing whether to listen. That deeper place is not a mystery you have to achieve. It is a recognition you have to make, and we are moving toward it now. Here is the central principle, and I want you to receive it not as a concept, but as a recognition. Consciousness is not produced by the mind. The mind is produced by consciousness. Awareness is not a function of thinking. Thinking is a function of awareness. You have been taught to believe that you exist because you think, but the deeper truth is that thinking exists because you are aware. The awareness came first. It always does, and that awareness is the cause. This matters practically, not just philosophically, because if the mind is the cause, then you are helpless. You are at the mercy of whatever thoughts arrive, whatever programs were installed in childhood, whatever fears culture deposited into your nervous system. If the mind is the cause, then freedom is impossible without first fixing every broken thought, every distorted belief, every emotional scar. And that is an infinite project. That is a project that never ends. That is the trap that most therapeutic and spiritual frameworks accidentally set for their practitioners. But if awareness is the cause, if consciousness precedes thought and generates the conditions in which thought arises, then the situation is entirely different. Then you do not need to fix every thought. You need to change the position from which you relate to thought. You need to return from fused identification back to awareness itself, not as a technique, not as a practice you perform for 20 minutes a day and then forget, but as a continuous orientation of your deepest identity. The mind can be directed only when you are not inside it. This is not a paradox. It is a simple mechanical truth. When you are fused with the mind, you cannot direct it any more than a river can redirect itself. But when you stand as the awareness behind the mind, direction becomes possible. Not forced, effortful, white-knuckled direction, but the natural, quiet authority of a consciousness that knows what it is and therefore knows what it is capable of choosing. In Neville Goddard's language, this would be described as occupying a state. The state is not a collection of thoughts. The state is the inner atmosphere from which thoughts naturally arise. When you change the state, the thoughts change with it, without you having to wrestle each thought individually. You do not rearrange the furniture. You change the room. And the room is not your thinking. The room is your awareness, your identity, your sense of what is true and real and possible and expected. Most people try to change thoughts while remaining fused with the mind. This is why results are temporary. They move one thought and another takes its place, shaped by the same underlying state. They repeat an affirmation and feel nothing, because the affirmation is floating on top of a state that contradicts it. The affirmation says abundance, while the state is whispering scarcity. The affirmation says wholeness, while the state is broadcasting inadequacy. The affirmation loses every time because the state is the deeper broadcast, and the mind is merely the receiver. To occupy a new state means to become aware from a new position. It means to allow your sense of identity to shift, not your surface thoughts, but the background feeling of what you are and what is natural for you. When that background shifts, the foreground rearranges itself, because the foreground has always been a reflection of the background. This is the inner cause. This is the operant power. This is what you are about to learn to use, and here's the crucial thing. You already have this power. You have always had it. You have been using it unconsciously your entire life, generating states based on inherited programs, and then watching reality confirm those states back to you through the mirror of experience. Nothing will be given to you today that you do not already possess. What will change is your conscious relationship to the power that was always yours. Neville Goddard spent decades trying to point people toward a single recognition, not a technique, not a set of rules, a recognition. He said, in more ways than across more books than most people read in a lifetime, that consciousness is the only reality, that I am is the name of the one power, that the state you occupy from the inside is the cause that produces the world you encounter on the outside. He was not speaking metaphorically. He was describing a mechanics of reality that most people find confronting, precisely because it refuses to let them remain victims. When Neville spoke of I am, he was pointing to the awareness itself, not the thoughts that arise in awareness, not the feelings, not the self-image built from years of experience, but the naked, prior fact of being, the simple recognition that before any label, before any story, before any belief, there is awareness that knows it exists, that knowing is I am, and that knowing, depending on what it identifies with, becomes the seed of what reality then grows. If I am fuses with fear, the world reflects fear back. If I am fuses with unworthiness, relationships and circumstances confirm unworthiness. Not as punishment, not because reality is cruel, but because reality is a mirror, and the mirror does not choose what it reflects. It simply reflects the dominant identification faithfully and without judgment. This is not a teaching designed to shame you. It is a teaching designed to show you that the same mirror that reflected the old state can reflect the new one. The mirror obeys. The question is always, who is commanding it? A Course in Miracles approaches this from a different angle, but arrives at a structurally identical place. It draws a sharp line between what it calls the ego and what it calls true perception. The ego, in this teaching, is not your personality. It is the part of the mind that believes it is separate, small, threatened, and at the mercy of forces outside itself. The ego is identification with the fearful thought stream. It is the self that the mind has manufactured out of conditioning, defense, and the need for control. True perception, in the Course's language, is not a better version of ego seeing. It is a fundamentally different mode of awareness, one that arises when the grip of ego identification loosens and something quieter becomes visible. The Course would say that what you are, beneath the ego, is not a body, not a history, not a collection of learned responses. What you are is a point of awareness that is inherently whole, inherently at peace, and inherently capable of seeing differently when it chooses to. Both teachings are pointing at the same interior architecture. There is the surface mind, built from conditioning, running on fear, producing thoughts that feel like identity but are not. And there is the awareness beneath and behind the surface mind, the observer, the consciousness, the I am that is cause rather than effect. The spiritual authority does not live in the thoughts. It lives in the awareness that precedes thought and chooses what thought will be allowed to occupy the throne. Translated into the practical language of your daily inner life, this means the following. When the mind produces a fear, you have a choice that most people do not know they have. Not the choice to think a better thought immediately, but the choice of where to place your sense of self. Do you enter the fear and become it? Or do you step back into the awareness that sees the fear? Do you fuse with the story, or do you hold the position of the one who knows the story is arising? That choice is the most fundamental freedom available to a human being. And it is always available, regardless of what the mind is currently saying. This is the spiritual authority that both Neville and the Course are asking you to reclaim. Not authority over other people, not authority over circumstances, authority over your own inner identification. Because when that identification shifts, when the cause changes, when I am chooses a new state, the mirror has no choice but to begin rearranging. It is not magic, it is mechanics. And the mechanics are inside you, always operating, always faithful, always producing the world that matches what you have placed on the throne of your awareness. Imagine a throne room. The throne is not empty. It is never empty. Something always sits on it. Something always occupies the seat of inner authority, the place from which the kingdom of your inner world is governed, and from which the outer world receives its instructions. The question is not whether the throne is occupied. The question is who has been sitting on it without your conscious permission. For most people, the mind sits on the throne, not the whole mind, but the loudest part of it, the fearful part, the part that was trained in childhood to watch for danger, the part that learned to equate approval with safety and failure with catastrophe, the part that generates intrusive thoughts as a strategy for control, because if it can predict every terrible outcome in advance, perhaps it can protect you from them. This part of the mind has been sitting on your throne for years, issuing commands into your subconscious, shaping your state, governing your assumptions, and producing the world you then experience as reality. And here is what makes this so subtle and so difficult to see. That part of the mind does not feel like an advisor. It feels like you. It speaks in the first person. It uses your voice. It refers to itself as I. When it says I am afraid, you believe that you are afraid, rather than understanding that a voice inside you is reporting fear, and you are the one listening to it. The advisor has convinced you that it is the king, and so, the kingdom has been run by fear, dressed in the costume of identity. The throne metaphor is not about arrogance. It is not about suppressing or defeating the mind. The mind, even the fearful part of the mind, is not your enemy. It is an advisor, and advisors have a proper role. They gather information, they assess risk, they process the past, they model the future. A good advisor is genuinely useful, but an advisor who runs the kingdom, who overrides the king's authority, who speaks as though their assessment is always final, is an advisor who has stepped out of their proper function. And the king's job is to reclaim the seat. You are the king in this metaphor, or the queen, or the consciousness, if you prefer language without hierarchy. You are the awareness that preceded the mind. You are the one who, at the deepest level, chooses the state. The mind brings its reports. The mind says, here is what I observed. Here is what I fear. Here is what the evidence suggests. And consciousness, from the throne, receives those reports and then decides what is true, what is real, what is assumed, what is expected. The throne is the place of decision, and the decision is not made with thoughts. It is made by choosing what to identify with. When you are off the throne, when you are fused with the mind and dragged through its reports as though each one is a command, reality organizes itself around the mind's dominant content. Fear on the throne produces a fearful world. Scarcity on the throne produces a scarce world. Unworthiness on the throne produces a world full of evidence of unworthiness. not because the world is punishing you, but because the mirror reflects the throne faithfully and without exception. When consciousness returns to the throne, when the awareness reclaims its position as the one who chooses rather than the one who reacts, the instructions change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but at the level of assumption, of state, of the deep background frequency from which the surface mind takes its cues. The mirror begins to shift because the signal has shifted. The echo begins to change because the original sound has changed. The world, which was never the cause, begins to rearrange in response to the new occupant of the throne. The path back to the throne is not complicated, but it does require something unfamiliar. It requires you to stop moving for a moment inside yourself, to stop following the next thought, to feel the slight but unmistakable sense of the one who is watching. That watcher is already closer to the throne than any thought you have ever had. That watcher is the beginning of the return. When you sit on the throne, the mind does not disappear. The advisor does not vanish. The reports continue to arrive. But something fundamental has changed in the relationship. Now the mind speaks, and consciousness listens, and then decides. Not every thought becomes action. Not every fear becomes assumption. Not every old program receives the endorsement of your deepest identity. The mind is heard, and then the king chooses. That is the natural order. That is the order we are returning to. Here is something that almost no one tells you about the way inner and outer reality interact. When you react to a mental movement as though it is the final truth about your situation, you do not just feel bad. You deepen the groove. You reinforce the state. You send a signal from the level of your identity that says, yes, this is real. Yes, this is who I am. Yes, this is what I should expect. And then the outer world, which is always faithfully mirroring the inner broadcast, begins to produce more evidence that matches the signal you just confirmed. This is how the loop closes. You feel the fear. You enter the fear. You treat the fear as reality. The state deepens. The subconscious receives the updated command. The mirror begins to rearrange. And then when the outer evidence arrives to match the inner state, you say, see, the fear was right. But the fear was not right. The fear was self-confirming. You obeyed it, and obedience is a command. The outer world is not giving you a report about reality. It is giving you a report about your most recent inner broadcast. Most people's spiritual practice, if they have one, is dominated by this dynamic. They feel something unwanted inside. They panic at the feeling. They perform their affirmation or visualization with an undertone of urgency, which is the undertone of a state that does not believe. They check the outer world for evidence that the practice is working. They find evidence that it is not working. They conclude that the method is broken, or they are broken, or reality is indifferent, and the state of brokenness is reinforced. The mirror reflects back exactly what was broadcast. Struggle with the external world is one of the clearest signs of being off the throne. When you are arguing with circumstances, when you are trying to manipulate conditions into producing what you want, when you are dependent on outer evidence before you will allow yourself to feel peace, you are confirming the belief that the outside world is the cause. And the moment you confirm that the outside world is the cause, you have surrendered your inner authority. You have stepped off the throne and handed the crown to the mirror. The mirror does not negotiate. Let that settle. The mirror does not bargain with you. It does not say, I will start reflecting something different when you have suffered enough. It reflects what you broadcast without delay, without commentary, and without preference, which means that every moment you spend fighting the reflection is a moment in which you are missing the broadcast, and the broadcast is what matters. The outer world is not the enemy. It is the display, and displays do not change by being argued with. This is also why reactivity to mental noise creates external patterns that seem to come from nowhere. You have a fearful thought about a relationship. You react to the thought with anxiety. The anxiety generates behavior, perhaps withdrawal, perhaps over-explaining, perhaps control. The behavior affects the relationship. The relationship produces evidence that something is wrong. The evidence feeds the original fear. The cycle appears to be external. It feels as though the relationship is the problem, but the original signal was internal. The relationship is faithfully reporting the broadcast, and the broadcast began the moment you entered the thought and confirmed it with your identity. The old identity cannot be dismantled by arguing with its consequences. It can only be replaced from within, and the replacing does not happen through force. It happens through a shift in position. It happens through the return of the awareness to the throne, from which a new assumption is held, a new state is occupied, a new signal is broadcast into the subconscious machinery that then instructs the mirror what to reflect. External struggle, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how spiritually dressed, is still struggle with the reflection. And you cannot change the reflection by touching it. The change must begin at the source, and the source is always inside. Let me walk you through the actual operation now, not as a theory, as a lived sequence that you can begin in this moment and refine over time. The operation has several movements, and each one builds on the one before it. Do not rush through them. Do not treat them as steps in a checklist. Treat them as layers of a single shift that deepens with practice. The first movement is witnessing. You become the one who watches the mind without entering it. This does not require a meditation cushion. It does not require silence or stillness in your environment. It requires only that you locate, right now, the part of you that can observe a thought without being the thought. Notice a thought arising. Notice the thought as an object in your awareness. It appeared. You saw it. You are still here. That gap, however small, between the thought and the awareness of the thought is the throne room. That is where you are returning. The second movement is disidentification. Once you can witness a thought, you begin to release the emotional fusion that makes the thought feel like truth. This is not suppression. I want to be clear about that. You are not pushing the thought down. You are simply declining to co-sign it with your identity. The thought says, something terrible is about to happen. Witnessing sees. There is a thought saying something terrible is about to happen. Disidentification says, this thought is not the final authority on what is real, and the awareness holds steady without forcing the thought to disappear. The third movement is choosing inner speech. From the position of the witness, from the vantage point of the one who is not fused with the thought stream, you now have the ability to introduce a different inner voice, not as an affirmation pasted over the fear, but as the natural speech of the one who knows what is true. Neville Goddard called this inner conversation. The subconscious, he taught, does not respond to outer declarations made with urgency. It responds to the feeling tone of inner conversation, the quiet certainty of a consciousness that has already assumed a state. The inner speech you choose is not loud. It does not argue with the fear. It speaks from a position above the argument. It says things like, this is already settled. This belongs to me. This is who I am. not as a performance. As the natural thoughts of someone who has already taken the throne, you are rehearsing the thoughts that would be natural to the identity you are claiming. And because the subconscious does not distinguish between an imagined state and an actually occupied state, the machinery begins to respond. The fourth movement is occupying the state. This is the deepest layer of the operation. It is not about individual thoughts or individual affirmations. It is about the felt sense of being a person for whom the desired reality is already the natural background. What would it feel like to already be the one who is calm? What is the inner atmosphere of someone who does not need the outer world to confirm their worth? What does the body feel like when the throne is occupied and the mind is simply advising rather than commanding? Drop into that feeling, not forcefully. Let it rise from the inside, the way warmth rises when you move from cold air into a heated room. The fifth movement is persistence without monitoring. This is where most people stumble. They occupy the state for a moment and then immediately check the outer world for evidence. Did anything change? Is the mirror responding yet? And the checking is itself a signal of the old state, because the old state believes the mirror is the authority. Consciousness does not check for permission to maintain its position. The king does not ask the mirror whether he is still the king. You hold the state not as an experiment awaiting results, but as the natural orientation of the one who knows the mechanics. The sixth movement is returning without self-judgment when the old patterns arise, and they will arise. The mind has deep grooves, and grooves take time to fill. When the old fear returns, when the old thought resurfaces, when you find yourself fused again with the noise, you do not punish the lapse. Punishment is a state. Punishment broadcasts unworthiness. You simply notice, recognize where you went, and return, again and again, without drama, without a running score of how many times you got pulled back in. The returning is the practice. The returning is the reprogramming. The seventh movement is revision. This is a teaching Neville gave that is among the most powerful tools in this entire system. When a day or a moment has passed in which you were fused with the old state, you do not have to accept it as permanent. Before sleep, in the quiet of the night, you revise the moment internally. You replay it as it should have been. You let the new version occupy the feeling with the same vividness that the original event carried. The subconscious, which stores its commands in the currency of feeling, receives the revised version as real. The old impression is gently overwritten. The groove is slowly filled. The eighth movement is gratitude from the state of having, not gratitude as a technique, not manufactured gratitude designed to trick the universe, but the natural gratitude of someone who has returned to the inner source and recognized that what they were seeking was never outside them. That gratitude is a frequency of wholeness, and wholeness, broadcast from the throne, is one of the most coherent signals the subconscious can receive. And the ninth movement is presence. Being here, being in this moment as the awareness that you are, not the thoughts you are thinking, not the fears you have inherited, not the identity the past would insist you carry. Presence is not a spiritual luxury. It is the practical ground of the throne. You cannot occupy the state of cause while you are absent from the present moment, because the present moment is the only place from which inner commands are issued. The past cannot command. The future cannot command. Only the now. And you are here, now, and you are the cause. A question arises at this point, and I want you to hear it answered honestly. What about the thoughts that keep returning even after I have done this? What about the fear that comes back the next morning, just as loud, just as convincing? What about the emotional charge that refuses to dissolve just because I have recognized that I am not the thought? This is not a failure of the practice. This is the nature of deep grooves encountering a new instruction for the first time. Here is the mechanics of it. The subconscious does not update itself the way a file on a screen updates. It updates through repetition, through feeling, through the slow accumulation of a new dominant impression. You have been broadcasting the old state for years, in some cases, for decades. The grooves are real. The patterns are real. The returning fear is simply the old broadcast still completing its loop. It does not mean the new instruction has not been received. It means the new instruction is still competing with a prior dominant pattern. Think of it this way. You have been playing the same song inside yourself for a long time. The acoustics of the room are built around that song. The reverb of that sound is still present in the walls. When you change the song, the room does not immediately go silent and then fill perfectly with the new sound. For a time, both sounds overlap. The old reverb is still fading while the new song is still establishing itself. The presence of the old sound is not evidence that the new sound has failed. It is evidence that the old sound had depth. Now here is what most people do wrong during this overlap period. They hear the old fear return, and they interpret its return as proof that they have not changed. And that interpretation, that reading of the evidence, is itself a choice made from the old state. It is the mind on the throne again, declaring that outer and inner evidence determines truth. But consciousness on the throne does not look to the fear's return as the final word. Consciousness on the throne says, I see you. I acknowledge that you are still completing your loop, and I am not returning to you as home. The question about silence and suppression also deserves a direct answer. Many people fear that stepping back from thoughts, that disidentifying from mental noise, is a form of emotional avoidance, that they are pushing their feelings down rather than processing them. I want to distinguish between two very different things. Suppression says, this feeling is not allowed to exist. Witnessing says, this feeling is fully allowed to exist, and I am the one in whose awareness it exists. Suppression is the mind trying to eliminate a threat. Witnessing is consciousness allowing a visitor to be seen without becoming the visitor. Genuine witnessing is actually the most thorough form of emotional processing available, because it gives the feeling space to be fully what it is without the added layer of reactivity that usually amplifies and prolongs it. When you stop fighting a fear, when you stop trying to resolve it through analysis or suppression, when you simply hold it in awareness as something arising in you rather than something that is you, the fear often passes more quickly than it would have under attack. Not always, not instantly, but without the fuel of identification, it cannot sustain itself at the same intensity. The sensory world will take time to catch up to the inner shift. This is one of Neville's most important and least understood teachings. He called it the interval between the assumption of the state and the outer evidence of the state. Reality is not instantaneous. The mirror has its own timing, and that timing is not punishment. It is simply the interval between the inner command and the outer display. During that interval, the work of the consciousness is to hold the state without requiring the outer world to confirm it. This is the hardest part, not the initial shift, the holding the new assumption while the old evidence is still in the room, holding the state of the fulfilled self while the conditions of the unfulfilled self are still visible. This is where most people abandon the inner work, because the outer world has not changed fast enough, and the mind interprets that as failure. But the mind is not the judge. The mind is the advisor. And the consciousness on the throne does not need the advisor's interpretation of the timeline in order to hold its position. Hold the state. Let the mind speak. Let the old fear complete its loop. Return again and again to the awareness that knows it is the cause and not the effect. The mirror will respond. It always does, because the mirror has never done anything other than reflect. And what you are now broadcasting from the throne is not a wish. It is a state, and states create their evidence in the world they touch. Let us bring together what has been built in this teaching, because the architecture of this shift deserves to be seen as a whole before you carry it forward. We began with the mind, not as the enemy, but as the place where most people have been living without knowing it. We saw the false strategy of using thought to fight thought, and we recognized that the battle itself was the proof of fusion. As long as you are fighting the mind, you are inside the mind, and the throne remains empty. We then examined pain, not as a judgment on your nature, but as evidence of location. Mental suffering is the experience of awareness compressed into identification with thought. The loop is painful not because the thoughts are uniquely powerful, but because the one who is watching has temporarily forgotten that they are the watcher. Pain, understood correctly, is a compass. It always points back toward the inner cause. We moved from the pattern to the principle. Consciousness precedes thought. Awareness is not produced by the mind. The mind is produced by awareness. I am, in Neville's understanding, is the name of that foundational awareness, the prior fact of being that, depending on what it identifies with, becomes the seed of the world it then encounters. A Course in Miracles names the ego as the false occupant of the throne and points toward a deeper perception that arises when the ego's grip is released. Both teachings converge on the same truth. The cause is not outside. The cause is the awareness itself. We then built the throne metaphor. The mind is the advisor. Consciousness is the king. For most people, the advisor has been running the kingdom, issuing commands into the subconscious in the currency of fear and assumption, and the mirror has been faithfully reflecting the output. Returning to the throne is not a dramatic act. It is the quiet act of remembering that you are the watcher, the chooser, the one who occupies the state from which the mind then speaks. We walked through the inner operation, from witnessing and disidentification, through chosen inner speech and occupied state, through persistence without monitoring, revision, gratitude, and presence. 9 movements that are not a rigid protocol, but a fluid return to the natural authority of consciousness. The operation is not something you perform, it is something you inhabit, and we addressed what the mind will say during the transition. The old fears will return, the old grooves will echo, the outer world will take time to respond. None of this is failure. All of it is the interval between the new command and its outer expression. The consciousness on the throne does not panic at the interval. It holds. It knows. It persists without the need for outer permission to remain in the state of cause. Everything in this video has been pointing toward one shift in identity, not a shift in behavior, not a shift in thought management, a shift in what you fundamentally believe you are. You are not the noise. You are not the fear. You are not the old identity built from years of unexamined conditioning. You are the awareness in which all of that arises. You are the cause that the mind expresses. You are the throne, and the time to return to it is not tomorrow. It is now. This identity is not something you have to earn. You do not earn awareness. You do not graduate into consciousness. You simply stop mistaking yourself for something smaller than what you are. The mind will tell you this is arrogant. The mind will tell you that you must prove this with outer evidence before you can claim it. That is the advisor speaking as though it is the king again. You recognize the pattern now, and recognition is the beginning of the return. I want to do something now that is not simply instructional. I want to seal this shift with a declaration, not a hollow affirmation, a genuine inner statement made from the position of the one who knows. Something you carry out of this video and into the rest of your day. A short sentence that places your identity exactly where it belongs. Not in the noise, not in the mirror, but at the inner cause. The declaration is this: I am not my thoughts. I am the awareness behind them. I am the cause. I want you to write that in the comments below this video, not as a performance for others, as an inner act of claiming, as the equivalent of sitting down on the throne and saying, I know what I am. Write it in your own words if you prefer. Write what feels true to you right now as the awareness that has been listening to this teaching. Something simple, something direct, something that names the shift that has been happening inside you during this past 45 minutes. When you write that declaration, you are not just commenting on a video. You are issuing an inner command. You are telling the subconscious, in the most public and therefore most committed form available to you in this moment, that the identity has changed, that the throne is occupied, that the mirror is receiving a new signal. That is not a small act. That is the kind of act that the inner machinery responds to. You began this video having believed your mind for a very long time. Every fear, every image, every prediction had the weight of truth. You obeyed the voice in your head because no one had ever taught you that a different position was available. But something shifted in you today. Not because I gave you information, because you held the position of the watcher long enough to feel it, long enough to recognize that the awareness was there before the thought arrived and would remain after the thought dissolved. The mind is still speaking. It will continue to speak. But you are no longer the same listener. You know now that the voice is not the throne. You know that the fear is not the final authority. You know that the world you encounter is the mirror and not the cause. And you know that the cause is exactly where it has always been, inside you, beneath the noise, waiting not to be discovered, but to be remembered. What you have touched today is only the beginning. Beneath the mind that generates the noise is a subconscious that has been running commands for years, commands built from the old identity, from the old assumption, from every belief you absorbed before you were old enough to choose. In our next teaching, we go there. We go into the subconscious itself. We examine the machinery beneath the machinery. We look at how the ego protects the old identity even when you are actively trying to change, and what you can do from the throne to begin issuing new commands at that deeper level. If this video opened a door, the next one reveals what is behind it. Subscribe so you do not miss that teaching. Not because this channel needs the number, but because the inner work has a sequence, and each layer you encounter makes the next one more accessible. You are not here by accident. You have been moving toward this recognition for longer than you know. Stay in the work. Stay on the throne. The cause is not outside you. It has never been outside you. And now, finally, you know where to look.